Well, as we told you at the top of the hour, a Colton teenager could soon be walking free after a couple of years, despite being the driver in a crash that killed 3 of her best friends in Amherst last year. Her name is Jayla Mueller, and she was given up to 4 years behind bars, but could get out a lot sooner than that because of bad behavior.
To talk more about her sentencing as a youthful offender, right now we're joined by Barry Covert. He is a defense attorney and a legal expert. He's going to share some insight for us. Barry, thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely.
So first, let's just begin. Maybe explain for those who don't know, what is youthful offender status? How is it handled in New York State?
So youthful offender status in New York State for a felony is, first of all, you have to be the right age, and she was 18 years old at the time that it occurred. And then the judge has a discretion as to whether to treat that individual as an adult or as a youth. And if the factors that the judge is supposed to look at is, does she have a prior criminal history? What was the nature of the offense? And perhaps most importantly, what are the chances of rehabilitation in the future? Because we don't want to prevent children from having a life afterwards if they can be rehabilitated, that they can be a good citizen for the community. But the judge did give her the maximum sentence that she could, given that she found her to be a youthful offender, and gave her 1 1/3 to 4, which means that she could try to get out after about 1 1/3 to get parole. That's not likely going to be granted. She'll probably do about 2.5 years or so, and then with good time, she'll be released at that point.
Youthful offender sentencing or status at the sentencing is just one part of how New York State, I guess, for lack of a better verb, adjudicates its youthful offenders.
Correct.
It's young people who commit crimes. There are some other aspects of this that go into it in terms of how the state treats its youthful offenders, bail reform, how long, of course, sentences can be for. But this is all part of a broader way of how New York treats its people who are young, who happen to commit crimes.
And most states do this,
Yes.
by the way. I think all states do this. And they have their own definition of what's a juvenile, what's youthful. But this is how we handle youth. And if you don't have a prior criminal history, then by and large, and there's a good chance of rehabilitation in the future, you're going to get youthful offender status, which means now that you don't have a criminal conviction, she can rightfully state in the future that she's not a convicted criminal, but she is facing 1 1/3 to 4 years incarceration. So that's a very serious sentence, but it does give her the benefit in the future of being able to say, I don't have a criminal conviction.
You mentioned just before a very important part of the sentencing that the judge must take into consideration at sentencing, and that is if an offender has a prior record. How much does that weigh in at times, either throughout the process of adjudicating a minor or a youthful offender, and also, of course, at sentencing? How much does their criminal record come into play?
Come into play an awful lot. So if you're going to the judge and saying, I'd really like my client to get youthful offender status, and the judge looks back and says, your client's already had youthful offender status in the past, and yet your client's in front of me again today. That really is a very difficult argument to make, and a lot of judges won't give a second, third bite at the apple. But if it's a first-time offender, then generally the judges are supposed to exercise their discretion and give youthful offender status on the hopes that after she's released from jail and she integrates into society, that she will be truly rehabilitated and can be a good member of society. We try to take what someone does at a very young age and potentially not hold that against them for the rest of their lives.
Going off of, what else plays into the judge's discretion, we heard our Sarah Minkowitz report. None of the victims' families wanted youthful offender status. The DA also opposed it. Does that bear any weight when it comes to determining it?
It certainly does. So the judge is going to absolutely take into account the victims' families, their comments, what the district attorney wants to see happen. There's also what's called a probation report that was created by probation department in any given case that give to the judge to review and go through all the criminal history. The judge, and this is not an easy job, then has to sit back and say, well, I understand everybody's feelings. I understand this is a horrible tragedy, terrible taking of lives. It's just horrible. But we can't change that now. So the question now is, what's the right result for this young lady? Should we have her be treated as an adult and be a convicted criminal for the rest of her life? Or does she have a chance of rehabilitation? Do we want to work with her, see if she can do the jail time, which is a lot of jail time, and then when she gets out, reintegrate into society successfully? And if she doesn't, then she's going to have a real problem in any future charges, if there are any in the future. So the judge has to make a very reasoned decision decision in light of lots of tough feelings and emotions, obviously, from the victims' families and friends. So it's not easy, but this really is what the judge is supposed to do. What happened in this case, if she did not have a prior criminal record and she shows signs of rehabilitation, is we err on the side of working with that person to see if they can reintegrate into society after they serve their jail.
There are a number of high-profile cases that are happening right now or have happened over the past 6 months or so that have made a lot of news about young people getting arrested for serious crimes. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the severity of the crime and how that plays a role in terms of youthful offender status. We have a 14-year-old and a 16-year-old who are currently at the detention center on East Ferry, charged in the murder of a 3-year-old, right? They were carrying out a hit, according to prosecutors. They are staying in the detention center and face adult consequences. That's because of the severity of their crime, right?
That's right. Because these are murder charges against those individuals, and that's an exception to youthful offender status, they're being treated as adults, and that's what the district attorney wants to have happen. Now, depending on what the outcome of the case is, that may revert back to potential juvenile for the 14-year-old and youthful offender for the 16-year-old. So, but those are very different crimes than this one. Well, we have tragically, and the families don't want to hear this because they lost 3 loved ones. This was not an intentional act. This was not somebody picking up a gun and shooting at other individuals. This was a young person apparently driving very quick, very fast, recklessly, and resulting horribly, tragically in the death of 3 people. But this is not an individual who wanted to cause of murder or harm, who picked up a gun and started shooting at people or where people could be. So the judges are just going to treat these as very different crimes because this is not an intentional act of violence.
All right, defense attorney and legal expert Barry Covert, thank you so much for taking the time to come in this afternoon and join us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Barry.